Thank you, Cheryl. And all of you, thank you for coming out on this rainy, sleety, cold day, braving the damp. So Annie and Tigray and I have been part of this group right from the beginning, and we want to tell you about it. And I'm going to start with a little bit of history. Almost 20 years ago, right here in Greenfield, several white people who had attended an Undoing Racism workshop started a new group that met for about 5 years. We focused on both self-education and action, and we called ourselves European Dissent Uprooting Racism. In the early 00s, Lawanza Lett Brewington was one of the leaders of the Discrimination Prevention Project, a Black-led anti-racism group based in Greenfield. She was writing a play about slavery in this area. She invited our group to contribute to her play, and we came up with the idea of writing an apology for slavery from people of European descent. We started drafting it. Well, shortly after that, our group stopped meeting, and the play never happened. But Annie Tigray and I continued writing. We wrote about how our country's history of brutal racism lives on in the present, and recognizing that an apology is empty if not coupled with meaningful action, we make commitments to change. It's important for white anti-racists to recognize and follow the wisdom of leaders of color. Otherwise, we often go astray. Maybe you've witnessed that. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to Dr. Enoch Page, then of UMass, for his amazing mentoring through this project. We also want to acknowledge and appreciate several others who were so generous with their guidance and support during our first years. Tim Bullock, Ingrid Askew, Sister Claire Carter, Howard Clark, Brother North Star, Kato Shonen, Dwayne Brewington, and Tall Oak, who we don't have a photo of. But here's a photo from almost 5 years ago of our group at that time with some of the people who I just named. So when we were almost done writing that apology statement, we still weren't really sure what we were going to do with it. We no longer had a play to put it in. Would we actually present it to African Americans in some way? Should we try to find a publisher? And then one day, Mustafa, who was another of our mentors, said, "No, you need to take that on the road." And I remember asking him, "What road is that, Mustafa?" And he said, "The Great White Road." So actually that rang true because we knew that one of the most important things that white people who get it, can do is to spread the word in our own communities and help grow more white anti-racists. So we became Mass Slavery Apology, and others started joining us. In January of 2009, 10 years ago, we printed the booklet, put up a website, and invited others to add their signature. We've got more than 500 signatures now, and hoping to get more. We had two main goals: to reach other people of European descent who were ready to learn more about white supremacy and about systemic racism, and to build support for reparations for slavery. A lot of our first outreach was digital: the website, an email newsletter, our Facebook page. We also did some public speaking. This is a picture of some members of our group speaking in a classroom in Brattleboro. We had several gigs speaking to classes at Brattleboro High School. We also spoke to faith groups and even on some local radio shows and other places. We also brought an information table with a display to other groups' events with a goal of creating a space for conversation and outreach. And you can see the indoor version of this display in the hallway there. It's blow up of some of the pages from that apology statement. Now I'm going to just give you a few highlights of what we've been up to in the past 5 years ago or so. By 2013, we were ready to start creating our own events and not just piggybacking on other groups. We launched a series of 4 films with workshops. And Annie Tigray and Opiemi, who's here, and Ingrid, who is not, were key in that activity. And then after its first year, that morphed into this program series, monthly. Our Undoing Our Own Racism discussion group started in 2014. It offered a space for participants to examine themselves and our culture in a structured small group setting. That met monthly for about a year. In 2015, we got some feedback that the name Mass Slavery Apology didn't really reflect our commitment to justice to all who are targeted by racism. And so we became Racial Justice Rising. But the original project is still alive and well, and it is still called Mass Slavery Apology. In early 2016, we started our weekly vigil for racial justice. More recently, we've become responding more actively to the racism in our own communities, which is still regrettably active. I'm really excited about our newest project, soon to start, which will be directed by Gloria Matlock. Twice as Smart will work with elementary school kids outside of school hours on academic skills and also on less concrete things like self-respect, goal setting, learning to collaborate with others. If I had to summarize, I would say that our work has primarily been about growing a vibrant community for racial justice. Most of our work is here locally, and some of our work also reaches people all over the country and all over the world. I'm really happy to see you all here today, because you're part of that vibrant community. In that spirit, we want to remember 3 dear friends who are no longer with us. Karen Brandow joined us in 2013 to help plan this program series. And she only got to attend a couple of the programs before she died just over 4 years ago. We lost Susie Palucci, who supported our work in so many ways this past March. And Brian Bienvenu Bliss passed away just a couple of months ago. He was also an active supporter and participant right from the beginning. Everything we do is rooted in that statement of apology and commitment. Annie, in a minute, is going to read you the central core of what we wrote. And after that, Tigray will tell you more about those original commitments that we made. So Annie, you're on.
There it is. I'm on. That's great. So, our apology and commitment.
Can everybody hear? Anybody have trouble hearing?
Sound good enough? Okay. Well, our manifesto, or our apology and commitment, goes like this. The institution of slavery was both a crime against humanity and a profound moral wrong. Yet the historic and present-day wounds of slavery have been largely unacknowledged by white people. Even after slavery ended, legal segregation, systematic terrorism, and murder continued. Socially sanctioned discrimination, genocidal behavior, and white privilege persist to this day. We whites benefit materially from the system of privilege which we created at the expense of our fellow citizens of color. At the same time that we benefit materially, we are harming ourselves spiritually. If we truly value dignity, respect, and equal justice for all, we must work hard to change the system of white privilege rather than continuing to participate in it unquestioningly. Words cannot express our remorse for the long history of unrelenting violence caused by our collective white ancestors. Nor can words describe our sorrow for the pain and suffering that continue today because of our destructive behaviors, attitudes and behaviors, and our failure to stop this ongoing devastation. We have a sacred responsibility to right these wrongs. For all of this, we apologize to the people of African descent in this country, to the communities in Africa from which their ancestors were abducted, and to the descendants of all others who were enslaved in this country. We have lost any right to your trust. We realize that it will require many consistent positive interactions and actions over a long period of time until we're able to earn your trust and forgiveness for our grave violations and wrongdoings. Because we know that an apology is meaningless if not coupled with appropriate action, we commit ourselves to act. Taking our direction from people of color, we will continue to work toward justice and reconciliation. The ways we will do this include the following. 1, we will seek mentors to guide us to a deeper understanding and healing of our racist ways and to help us end the system of white privilege. We will educate ourselves about how the systems of white privilege, racism, and internalized superiority create the extreme power imbalance that exists between the races. We will acknowledge, I shouldn't expand my voice because it gives us feedback. Well, I'll try to be a little quieter. We'll acknowledge and celebrate. We will acknowledge and celebrate both the commonalities that and celebrate both the inherent differences that exist among people and the commonalities that result from our shared humanity. War. We will promote a fair telling of all people's histories and contributions. 5. We will embrace membership in a multicultural, multilingual, and multi-faith community, global community, that strives for just and respectful treatment of all. In this way, we will free ourselves from the white identity, which is based on domination and privilege, and will begin to assume a new identity as global citizens. We will support reparations for descendants of the enslaved, and we will support the leadership of the African Americans who are working to define what forms these long overdue reparations will take.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Annie and Jen, for starting us off. And hello, everyone. I'm T. Gray. So glad to see everyone here today. I also want to say a special thank you to OPME, who is one of our mentors early on, as Jen mentioned, who's here with us today. Thank you, OPME. A dear friend of mine, retired medical doctor and community organizer. Now I want to talk about some actions we are taking and we can take to follow through on some of the commitments Annie just read. I will focus on the sixth one regarding reparations. Everything I'm about to mention is summarized in a handout, so you don't have to take notes. I'm going to cover a lot of material really quickly, and we have a lot of handouts right over there. And if you are new to the concept of reparations, this talk may stir up difficult feelings like pain or grief. All feelings are welcome here. We will have time, like Cheryl mentioned, for questions and comments at the end. So reading more from the apology statement, why reparations? African Americans have made incalculable contributions to this country and have also suffered immeasurable losses. As whites, we assert fervently that we are accountable for those damages. We also assert that the ways in which reparations take place must be determined by the descendants of those who were enslaved. As I was preparing for this talk, a white friend of mine asked me, who are the descendants of the enslaved? I explained that most African Americans are, and that Native Americans were enslaved too. But for the purpose of this talk, we are focusing on reparations to the African American population. In August of last year, I went to a conference on reparations sponsored by the New England chapter of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And I'm really excited to say that Brenda Lett is from that organization. She's here today. Brenda, thank you for coming. Thank you very much. Some of the highlights of what I learned at the conference is that reparations is about healing the human family. It's about justice, not charity. And there's external and internal repair needed both for people of African descent and people of European descent. For those of you who want to learn more about why reparations is so vitally needed, I want to point you to two resources. Yes Magazine created a wonderful visual on the topic of why reparations. There's also a video by Dr. Joy DeGruy, who wrote a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Disorder, where she so clearly describes the need for reparations and how both the oppressed and the oppressors have been harmed by the legacy of slavery. So what actions can we take to repair the damage, past and present? This message is primarily for people of European descent. So one action, if you haven't already signed the apology statement and the commitments, please consider joining the 500 plus that have signed. One of our original advisors, Brother North Star, which Shen mentioned earlier, suggested we take this statement to the Massachusetts State House and ask our legislators to make an apology and commitment for reparations for the slavery that happened in our state. Other states have made formal apologies. Massachusetts hasn't yet. We are collecting signatures, and so that eventually we can bring this to our legislators and show there is support for reparations. Another action we can take, I attended a reparations webinar in January of last year. hosted by the Fellowship of Reconciliation and the Truth Telling Project. One suggestion given was for us to ask our U.S. representatives to support H.R. 40. I'm curious, how many people have heard of H.R. 40? So there's some of us, that's great. For those who haven't heard of it, it's a proposal at the federal level to study the need for reparations for African Americans. So we suggest to find out if your U.S. representative is a co-sponsor. If not, ask them to sign on. My U.S. representative is Jim McGovern, and I called his office 5 times over a period of several weeks last summer, and he is now a co-sponsor. And when I first called his office and spoke to the aide told me said that Jim McGovern hadn't even heard of H.R. 40 and thanked me for bringing it to his attention.
Good work, Ingrid.
Thank you. Another action we can take is to create our own individual reparations account. Michael Eric Dyson wrote a book, Tears We Cannot Stop. He suggests we create these types of reparations accounts. To learn more about them, you can see his video or read his book. I brought his book with me if you want to have a glance at it. Another example of individual reparations opportunities is there's a local group called Western Mass Surge, showing up for racial justice, that invites individuals to support local groups led by people of color who are doing reparative work in their communities. For example, Springfield No One Leaves is a nonprofit that helps with housing foreclosure crises. Individual reparations money is being channeled to them through Western Mass Surge. For me, taking action towards repair eases the profound pain I feel when I hear from my African American friends and in the news about another conscious or unconscious violent action that's happening in my white supremacist culture. In addition to taking action, for me, it's really important to be working as part of a group and not in isolation. I have known Annie and Shen for almost 20 years now, and I've called them, picked up the phone and called them so many times to get help working on this racial justice work. Since then, I have developed deep friendships with people of African descent that I can also turn to, and for me, that really makes a big difference, makes all the difference for me. There are a lot of racial justice groups in the area, and if you aren't already in a group, please consider joining one. We would love more help on these Saturday programs. Talk to us if you're interested. There's also a small pink handout with listing of other local groups in our area. I've highlighted some outer actions we can take or external repair. Equally important, in my opinion, is the internal repair that is needed, namely looking at my part in the problem of systemic racism. I have a morning practice where I review my day and see if I've caused harm to myself or others. How this applies to my racial justice work is, as a person of European descent, I need to look at my racist ways and, let's see, is that, no, okay. As we described in commitment number 1 in the booklet, I'm learning that whenever I'm in conflict with others, instead of my tendency to blame, I can gently ask myself, what is my part in this? Am I being part of the problem or part of the solution? Does my action or reaction create more unity or division? There's a helpful handout called White Supremacy Culture by Tema Okun that gives specific examples of when we are part of the problem and how we can be part of the solution. since I have been taught not to see my white privilege or white supremacy attitudes, I personally commit to taking at least one anti-racism workshop a year. I have taken, some of you might know about the Undoing Racism trainings. I've taken them, and also there's a Walking in Balance training that's offered right here in our area by Visiting Bear Circle. And I highly recommend both of these trainings. Reparations. Reparations is an opportunity to be part of the solution. To conclude, inner and outer racial repair work is relevant because for us to solve the pressing problems of today, like the threat of nuclear war, climate destruction, poverty caused by extractive capitalism, etc., in my opinion, we need to unite. And racism and white supremacy are barriers to uniting. You all here are helping us reweave the web of our interconnectedness, which has been compromised by the oppressions like racism. And by showing up today, you are being part of the solution. It shows you care. Thank you very much for coming today. So we're going to open it up to questions and comments, and I just want to say before that as people growing up with white privilege, it's easy to say some unconscious racially biased statement or to make some group invisible. The three of us have an agreement with each other to lovingly interrupt if we make some mistake during this discussion, and we welcome your feedback too in this regard. Thank you.
So I'm just going to bring the mic to anybody who has a question or comment so that we can all hear each other.
Well, I'm Sandra, and I think I'm going to make a consciously racial statement. You know, when you finished your presentation, what crossed my mind was, first of all, deep gratitude for your leadership. And also just this sense that we can't all hold everything, and that you're holding this for our whole community. And I thought, oh my God, that's unconsciously racist. You know, that I would say, hey, you're doing a good job with something that I should be doing. And I'm just sitting with that, you know, because we can't hold it all. And your service is the speaking and the reminding and the lists and the self-examination every day. That's a gift to me because I don't do that with regard to racism. And I will rethink that now because of your leadership, but I then am confronted with the unconscious racism of not thinking about my own racism. So I really bow to you for your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I just want to respond a little bit and say that I'm glad that we're seen as leaders for talking about this, and that Black Americans and Indigenous people and Latino people and people who are the targets of racism have been talking about it, and we need to open our ears and listen, and if we're not hearing those voices, we need to start listening in other places. I just want to acknowledge that two of our mentors just walked into the room a few minutes ago. And one is Kathleen Anderson, who's in the back of the room right there. And the other is Tim Bullock, who's over on the side right there. So we before this little conversation part, we sort of told the story of our history and stuff. So here's two more people who are in that history. and ready for other questions or comments.
Hi, I'm Carol Letson, and for me, it's been helpful to come to the Saturday morning programs to be reminded. The reminders are important. And also, I want to say that just this last month, the, what do they call those, it's a burnt orange flyer that came into my house about the movement to change the emblem on our flag. There are so many different groups that are approaching individual problems. I appreciate all the different efforts that people are making. The image on our flag is an embarrassment to this state, and it should have been changed 100 years ago. So I just want to point out that each of us can pick and support all those different efforts in our way. We can't do everything, but it's wonderful to see the different mindset as we change and improve.
So any more comments to our panel before we actually ask your stories? Because some of you have come with your own stories, which I was just saying are stories of your encounters with race, racism, or white privilege. That's the next thing. But anyone else would like to just address the panel for their contribution?
Well, hi, I'm Daria. I just want to say thanks. Yeah, to everybody, whoever tries to do anything for change in the right direction. And hey, yeah, so thank you.
I think we can all echo that. Thank you.
Cheryl?
Thank you. I'm Suzanne, and I too want to thank you because I feel like I need constant reminder, and what you do in, especially DeGray reminding us daily to be thinking about our own racism. And for me, racism is connected with so many ills of this culture, which are all the wrong values. And I'm part of the Visioning Bear Circle, and I've been through 2 training sessions for others in learning these values, and all the values, the 12 of them, are all the opposite of this culture. It's like humility versus supremacy, and supremacy is a huge one in this culture. Connection with the land is another one, that people in this culture have been so disconnected from the land that we do so many abuses. And when I go through, even though I'm a trainer, I'm well aware that I need that for transforming myself. Because we've been raised in this very disrespectful, violent culture that it takes daily reflection and awareness to be transforming ourselves to our better nature. And thank you for showing us the way.
So that's wonderful. Let's once more thank our panel. Can we? Actually, I don't want to call them our panel. I want to call them the founders of Racial Justice Rising. This is who they are. And I also am humbled and grateful for the witness they have. And I just want to add one thing, which is that, I don't know about you, but I often feel like, do I open my mouth and maybe say the wrong thing? You know, that old fear of maybe I won't get it right, or maybe I'll say it wrong and I'll offend somebody. I think we have to ditch that. I think we have to speak up, and if we make a mistake and we get corrected, that's a learning. If we don't speak up and say anything because we're afraid to say the wrong thing, then we're not going to learn anything. So now we have maybe 15 minutes for short stories from you of your encounters with racism, race, white privilege.
I'm Kate Woolner from Northfield. Thank you for that wonderful recap of all of the work that's been done by the various iterations. When I was really little, meaning up until I was in first grade, I lived in a community outside of New York City that was very diverse. In my classroom, there was a mixture of class, race, ethnicity, religion, etc. And then going into second grade, our family moved ostensibly to be closer to where my father worked. But when I think back on it now, I'm pretty sure it had to do with my parents were dissatisfied with the quality of the school, and we moved to an essentially all-white community. And that's, I'm sure I started to learn racism earlier, but that's where my life became surrounded by white people, only seeing people of color in service jobs, not next to me on the school bus, next to me in the cafeteria table, etc. And it's a theory, I can't go back and ask my parents, they're not alive, but I do think that there were class and race issues in that move. I don't think I would have been able to maintain the very close friendships that I had with kids of color. As I got older, I think I would have been socialized away from that, probably. Another disconnect that I really noticed was my parents would watch on TV the events unfolding in the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, I looked at their circle of friends, and it was primarily white. And so there was that disconnect about the theory and the practice. And I'm really grateful to all the people who have, along the way, tried to correct my thinking, sometimes graciously and lovingly, and sometimes very abruptly, in ways that were difficult to hear. I'm still grateful for all of that, because without it, I would just have kept blindly going along the path that I was being trained for, white supremacy, et cetera, and it's a process that continues today, and I hope will continue until I'm deaf and blind and muttering around in my own insanity.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more. Just a second, see if someone else.
I'd like to cede my time to a person of color in the room. How about you?
Thank you. Well, my name is Tim Bullock, and born and raised in a little small town in North Carolina. This was during the 50s when segregation was pretty much at its height in that part of the country. And so what I came out of that whole experience of being raised in the South and dealing with racism is that many of us who bear the brunt of it take it on as something we have done, that we are somehow not doing, living up to the ideals. And this is a burden that I see us bringing into the 21st century, this victimization. And so one of my responsibilities, one of the things that I feel that I need to take on is to try to undo that, to unpack this feeling of self-unworthiness. And being a part of discussions like this, being a part of groups, being a part of projects that work on undoing racism is something that I've been involved in for the last 20 years. And being involved in it here in the Valley, I see progress being made. And so I'm hopeful that we can somehow overcome this, if not, as widespread, but maybe just as someone else has spoken, individually, how do we overcome this scar on our lives and our nation? So, thank you for giving me this mic, although I was not
Hello, Cheryl. I want to, if I could say something. Thank you so much, Tim, for your comments and for coming here, one of our advisors. I'd like to ask, I really feel really honored that Brenda Lett is part of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, and she traveled about 2 hours or 3 hours, I'm not sure, a long way. She lives in New Hampshire. And Kathleen Anderson is also part of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, and I just wondered if, Brenda, if you would like to share anything about what NCOBRA is doing, or Kathleen, both of you, or I'm wondering, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear.
Thank you. First, giving honor to God. And I want you to know that Kathleen and I, even though we are very much very good friends, very much love each other, we also very much disagree on many things. One of the unconscious things that happened while I sat there is when the nice lady said that she was going to give her time to a person of color. That's unconscious, as if though people of color, quote unquote, are somehow broken. And we can't ask for a mic. And I know that it was not intentional on her part, nor intentional on the brother's part who accepted the mic. So for me, black is a real issue in this conversation. And this whole this concept of people of color, because is white not a color? I think it is. So the language makes it difficult for us to do the work that we want to do. You're welcome. But first, after giving honor to God, I have to also acknowledge Willard Lett, who couldn't be here, who is the Northeast Regional Rep of NCOBRA. And he instructed me to share with you, and what Kathleen and I do agree on is the importance of education. And we do learn through education and our experiences. So we have something called the HR 40 Primer, and it's basically about the legislation. And it's no longer a study bill. The last thing that Congressman Conyers did was, along with some help from NCOBRA and other groups, they made it a remedy bill. That means that the international community, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on that name, but in Durban, they decided that enslavement was a crime against humanity. And that's what makes this color thing difficult for people of African descent like myself, is that I'm a human being. I'm not a color. And when you keep seeing me as a color, or if we see each other as a color, then we don't see the humanity that we all have. So, before you reach out to Nancy Pelosi, and I encourage you to do so, Black lives matter, all lives do matter. I think I said that right here in this room one time when you had the young people here and they almost tossed me out of here. But that was okay, because we end up, you know, it's a struggle where we're moving a little bit at a time. And as we get older, and as I heard the nice person say, how we're going to lose our hearing, yeah we are, and our eyesight, yeah we are, and then eventually we go away. So we're hoping that we do something while we're here, and I also join everyone else in saluting you in your leadership. It has been a pleasure and an honor to know you, and thank you for allowing me to say something.
Thank you for saying a lot.
Kathleen, you want to add? Add, girl.
Yeah, so professor at UMass, her name is Dr. Barbara Love, refers to colored people as the global majority. I once worked in a library in a high school and did a bulletin board presentation during the Women's History Month, and noted for everyone's review that the majority of people in the world are women of color who do not speak English. 2019 is being advertised as the 400 years since the arrival of a slave ship in Virginia, Jamestown. And for 400 years, the dark-skinned people of African descent have been held in a kind of bondage. First, indentured servitude bondage, and then when those people rebelled along with the Irish people who were also held in servitude bondage, rebelled against the plantation owners, that's when we started to have demarcation of laws that stated that dark-skinned people would be held in bondage in perpetuity for their lives, for the next generations. Since then, there's been the Emancipation Proclamation that did not immediately emancipate enslaved people across the country. It was a progression over multiple years. Then there was the 13th Amendment. I guess that's the part of the Emancipation Proclamation. Anyway, it made slavery illegal unless people were had committed crimes or were charged with crimes. So then we had the new slavery. Michelle Alexander calls it the new Jim Crow. And so then people of color, colored people, brown-skinned people, dark-skinned people, darker-skinned people started to be held in slavery through the prison industrial complex. I was on a walking pilgrimage with Tim Bullock. That's how we met. And part of our journey through the South, we traveled through communities that shared with us how after enslavement, people were rounded up and held on plantations to do farming and actually were killed just because they could then be free, they were killed. So we've had the legal slavery, we've had legal slavery in two forms, which continues in terms of the prison industrial complex, that part continues. And there has been effort to reduce the knowledge and intelligence of dark-skinned people. One thing, when one does some research, we'll find out that many of the advancements that we enjoy in the United States have been created by dark-skinned people. The traffic light, electricity, sewing machines, all kinds of mechanical devices. But yet we don't get acknowledged for that. So education is a way of repairing the damage that has been done against people of dark-skinned African descent. And I keep saying that, dark-skinned African descent, because there are Africans, Native Africans, who have light skin, that we don't often think of them as Africans. They get categorized in the Middle Eastern category. So, the HR 40. So what can white people do is often a question that gets asked. One thing, you can talk to other white people, light-skinned people.
Your people.
Your people. Your people.
Whoever they are.
Yes, talk to them. Talk to people about the, first get the primer and read it. James Lowen, who wrote Lies My Teacher Told Me, is a good resource to learn about the history, more accurate history of the United States. Ronald Takaki wrote The History of People of the United States. That's a good one too. So getting some research done. Read about HR 40 and what is included, and then advocate for it in every possible way, in every possible place. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. All right, two things. We have wonderful food. We don't want it to get much colder. We have wonderful cooks that I did not say who they were, but they're here, so I think we should all know who our wonderful cooks are. Where's Asma? Where'd she go? She in the kitchen? Okay. And we have Zoraida and Luis here. Thank you so much.
Very much. We did it with a lot of love and respect. So,
and here's Asma, just came out of the kitchen. She provided all the Middle Eastern food that we're about to enjoy. And just before we enjoy it, we did promise a time for announcements. Let's keep them as brief as you possibly can, because then we will be able to respect our food by not letting it get cold. So, announcements for a few minutes.
Just very quickly, I have some copies of the latest classes being offered by the Sojourner Truth School this spring. There are many wonderful workshops and classes being offered, including on white supremacy and racism, et cetera, et cetera. So either go online, truthschool.org, or grab a brochure.
Another announcement.
Does this work? Yep. After we're done with these announcements, we're going to have to take a break and do a little furniture rearranging. So maybe a few people who are able-bodied can help after we're done with these announcements. There's some tables lined up in the hall waiting to come in here. And we'll sort of move the chairs aside and bring in, I'd say 4 or 5 tables would be more than enough for the number of people here. The other announcement is, I think it was Cheryl who mentioned in the opening introduction, Racial Justice Rising is always looking for more people to help out, not just with these programs, but with all kinds of other things, of the things that we do. And talk to one of us if that's something you might be interested in volunteering.
I did neglect to say that. I also neglected to say we can always accept more donations, financial. So if anybody feels you have a little extra, that'd be great. Sandra.
For those of you whose lives have been touched by Pete Seeger, tomorrow at the Unitarian Church, led by Sarah Purtle in the back, is a service honoring his 100th anniversary. And it will be a service of sing-alongs at the UU in Greenfield, 10:30 tomorrow morning.
And if you haven't been touched by Pete yet, come and you will be.
I have an announcement. Somebody here mentioned about the Massachusetts state and emblem where there's a sword hanging over the image of a Native American. And David Detmold is here. Thank you, David, for coming. And if would you like to say anything more about the organizing? David's doing a lot of organizing in Massachusetts to get this flag changed, the symbol changed.
Yeah, briefly, because we're open for lunch soon, and it's great to see you all here. Yes, we are working very hard now to change the state flag and seal, which is, as Tigray just said, the image of a Native American man with a colonial broadsword suspended over his head. And this colonial broadsword was actually modeled after the sword that was said to be Miles Standish's broadsword. So if you know anything about his relationship with the Massachusetts tribe, 3 years after the Pilgrims arrived here in 1620, that would be 400 years ago, come 2020, that man killed Native Americans as a habit of course, and his sword was placed above their head. That's our official state seal. And like the state flag in Mississippi with the Confederate battle flag, it's time for these old images that have endured now for almost 400 years, in our case, to be retired, and to ask and invite Native leaders from the Commonwealth to sit at the decision-making table to determine whether, or even if, their images or history shall be represented as our official symbols in Massachusetts. So I'd be happy to talk to you further about that during lunch. In these next 2 years, this has been a bill that has been bottled up and stalled in the legislature here in Massachusetts for 34 years. But it is being reintroduced now by Joe Comerford and Lindsay Savadosa, and we're going to pass it in the next 2 years with your help. Thank you.
Thank you to our presenters, and thank you for all of you for coming and for offering your stories. And now we'll all just sort of take 5 minutes to clear the hall, set up tables, and we will feast together.